this button here and get the recorder on so I don't miss anybody that misses this presentation. All right, without further ado, I'm going to shut up. Becky, take it away.
Okay, hello everybody. Very pleased to meet you, and I will do my best to answer the questions that Tom's put to us. Before I start, I think I've got a little, I've prepared some slides to support the things I'm going to say. But I think the key thing is I'm not going to talk about, contrary to what Tom thinks, I'm not going to talk about being a woman in marketing. I'm just going to talk about being me in marketing. And through that, you might have some questions as like, did you have a problem? Were there any difficulties you faced? And what I want to say is I am absolutely 100% open to any questions you might have. And those questions might be related to, yeah, but how did you get that? Or how did you do that? Or what was your salary when you were doing this job? Or what was the reason why you were taken on in this job and not that job? I am totally open to any questions. So please feel free. I subscribe to the no bullshit school of marketing. So if you want to ask a question and I'm embarrassed by it, I'll tell you. And if not, I'll answer it. So without further ado, I've got a very simple presentation to share with you. So this is the story about the middle. So I want to just talk to you about 1 minute about the middle, what I mean about the middle. Very often we read in the news about the CMO of Unilever or the CMO of Coca-Cola or the CMO of Lego or the big marketer in the recent fintech IPO. I want to say to you that we all aspire to be them. I still aspire to be them, but they represent that tiny, small 1% of everybody who's doing marketing. And the likelihood that we will become that person is fairly minimal. Now, if you want to become that person, there are things you can do and there are ways you can behave. And there's a certain, I would call it luck involved in your career path. But for everybody else, there is the middle. And I call it the marketing middle. Now, I talk about a story about the middle because I am unfortunately now middle-aged. I'm 40. I'm middle class. It's quite boring. And I am a marketer who is not at the apex of a structure or a society. I'm a marketer doing my thing, how I know how to do for people who are happy to pay me to do that. And what I want to show you is it's quite good fun and it's quite, it can be really fulfilling. So almost take away that stress of thinking I need to be the CMO and that's what I should be aiming for. Aim for it by all means, but know that underneath that, there's a whole bunch of people who are doing really well in their lives and are really enjoying it as well. So I just want to tell you very shortly, who am I? Top picture here, that's me. I was halfway through my studies at university. I was studying French and film at university. So nothing to do with marketing, didn't touch marketing at university. This was me in Corsica, and I was on a road trip with a couple of Americans, a couple of Germans, a couple of French people, a couple of Brits, and we're having a great time. And this is me roughly now, looking slightly tired, a little bit older. I'm an independent marketing consultant, and I have been since 2018. I've got almost 20 years in brand and comms and marketing strategy. Started my career with sort of a bunch of bitty jobs for 6 years in different sort of little small jobs, and I'll take you through those. Then I joined a European agency called Playon, which is part of Ketchum. And then I joined Red Bull, and I worked in France, and I worked in the UK, and more recently I've worked independently for small and medium-sized enterprises. So that's my professional sort of background, but I'm also a massive Francophile, which means I love France. I've always studied French at school, so I studied the French language, went right up to what you would be your senior high school year. I studied French, and I thought I'd take it to university, and then I went to France. I've got 2 kids. They're small and full of energy and really quite annoying when they want to be. I'm married. My husband's, in French, it's called un motard. So somebody who is not only their passion, but it's also their profession is riding motorbikes. Love building houses. I've bought a house and I've spent 10 years knocking it down and building it back up again. I love sport. I've always played sport. I'm a bit of a sports billy and I love the outdoors. I love getting outside and I hate being stuck in the city. So that's me. And I think it's very important to present both sides of me. There's my professional side, but I can't disassociate who I am professionally with who I am personally. So here's my career, and I wanted to just show you this just as a small snapshot. It looks, depending on your point of view, it looks quite cool or it looks quite sort of middle-ish. So back over here, 1999 was when I started my studies, university studies. So for you, where you guys are now, it's a 4-year course I did. I studied French and film. And during those 4 years, I've shown you here, I did a student brand manager job, a student job for Red Bull. And I also worked for 3 months for a company called Golf Breaks, selling golfing holidays on the phone. And I want to just point that out because those experiences helped me later on. 2003, I left university and I got my first job. And then from there, I did a couple of, as you see, 2003, 2005, a couple of bitty jobs. And then I joined an agency. It was the big, for me, it was the big guns in Paris. It wasn't as big guns as it sounds. And I did 3 years with that agency. And then I rejoined Red Bull in France in 2008 and stayed there for almost 10 years until I left Red Bull. And then I started my independent career. So just to give you a snapshot, you know, this is available for later. And what you can see at the bottom of the slide is also my studies. So university, as you guys are now, in 1999. And then I did nothing, studied nothing until very, very recently. And I went back to studying and I can't get enough of it, funnily enough. And I restudied a couple of things and I've got a chartered marketing status and I've done 2 little mini MBAs in both in marketing and brand management. I'll come back to that and I'll come back to why I bothered going back and doing some more, because I appreciate you guys finishing your studies are probably over finished with studying for a while, and I can understand that. So first job out of university, I freshly graduated as a French and film studies graduate, which gets you nowhere, I can assure you that. And my sister's friend's husband, well, fiance, rang me and said, "You speak French?" And I said, "Oh yeah." And I was sunbathing in my back garden at university, because I'm looking for somebody who can help me just be my sort of bit of a job's worth sales assistant / maybe a bit of marketing / on-site help in France, in Saint-Étienne. I said, "That sounds good. Let me have a look on the map." And this is what I found on the map. This beautiful city, red roofs, looks lovely. It's nestled in the mountains. Well, this is cool. And I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." And I arrived in France, age 23, on the eve of a 4-day holiday. And I arrived and settled into my flat that they provided. And I started work on the Tuesday. And it was, this was my reality. Okay, so I was the sales assistant for a self-storage company called Boxmax, run by an Englishman, and he had 3 depots in France, 1 in Saint-Étienne, where you can see here, beautiful, but the actual depot was in the industrial zone in France, industrial zone of the city. So my lunch break, there was no lunch break because there was nothing to go and see above other than truckers. And my colleagues were the site manager, a lovely guy called Abdul, and Beatrice, who was the assistant, who between the 3 of us, we covered the opening hours of 7 in the morning till 7 at night. There we go. So my mission there was to sell self-storage space by any means possible. And what I've done for each of my jobs is I've picked up on the learnings. So my first learning out of university was I knew nothing of any real use. Now that won't be the case for you guys because you've actually studied marketing, whereas I studied French, French language, I knew how to speak a bit of French, but apparently not enough to talk over the phone and sell anything over the telephone. And I studied film, which isn't really very useful when you're selling self-storage space. So I knew nothing of any use. Couldn't even speak on the phone for the first 3 weeks. It was highly embarrassing. I choked every time I was past the phone. I learned that French working culture is very different to the UK. I learned that I can cry for 12 hours straight. I was extremely lonely. I arrived in a city where I knew nobody, and I had 2 working colleagues. And in France, the work-life divide is quite distinct. Depends on the industry, depends on the city. But I arrived in a small town in an industry that doesn't do after work socializing, and I found my social life limited to myself. And it was the first time in my life, I don't know if any of you have ever sat in the cinema with only you in the cinema. It's the first time in my life I watched a whole film. I've been the only person in the cinema. I also learned how to hang a door, because part of my job was to, when sales were slow and nobody's coming in, was to help build the boxes in the hangar. And I did that with another guy. And I also learned I like French boys, which I swore I wouldn't. I swore when I came to France, I'd come for 6 months, I'd do the job, I'd get fluent, and I'd go home. And you'll see that that wasn't the case. So next job, I finished that job, and my mission after that job was to go and visit my brother in New Zealand. So I did that for 2 months, and I came back. And the reason why I came back, because I'd met a French boy. Obviously, it all starts with boys. And I came back to France, and I came back to Saint-Etienne, actually to Lyon, which is the next door city. It's a big city in the center of France. And I said, I'm going to find myself a job, and I'm going to find myself a job in marketing. That's what I want to do. Because I really, really, really enjoyed working as a student brand manager for Red Bull at university. I loved the vibes. I loved what they were telling me to do. I loved sort of this way we were sort of getting people, exciting people, and getting people involved in this brand. So I wrote to Red Bull whilst I was there, and I said, hi, Red Bull France, which didn't exist at the time. And I said, my name's Becky. I used to be a student brand manager in England, and I really want to work for you. When are you opening in France? And at the time it was managed by Monaco. And Monaco were very kind, and they wrote back to me and said, hi, Becky, not right now. Thank you very much for your email, but not right now. Anyway, keep in touch. And I did. And every 6 months for the next 6 years, I wrote them an email. And I said, hi, it's Becky again. And I even got on first name terms with a guy called Benoit. And I said, any news? And after 3 years, Benoit was like, yes, maybe. I'll talk to you about it. And so I'll come back to that. So I'd started this in 2003, writing for Red Bull. But in the meantime, I had to find myself an actual job. So, you know, this was back in 2004. The internet exists, emails exist, but it's all quite slow. It's all quite sort of, we're not, you know, it's all quite sort of, how do I say? It's data cracking. It's sending emails out to individual people to say, have you got a job? And responding to me to job ads. So I found one on the roster of the British Embassy, looking for somebody to help organise a programme of events to celebrate 100 years of Franco-British relations, called the Entente Cordiale. And I applied and got that job. I spent a year in the British Embassy in Paris. It was beautiful, best surroundings ever. It's an embassy that's over 200 years old, huge building, high-ranking diplomats. It's lovely, and this was a very high-profile project between Britain and France. And so I got to speak with the ambassador every other day about the project, and it was great. I was 24, and I was living my best life in Paris. Things I learned: selling in a new idea. There were lots of very old people working on this project because it wasn't actually very sexy for a diplomat to work on this. And so it was given to myself and another young girl. And with the rest of the people who work on the project were quite old diplomats, sort of stuck in a rut, and they were sort of palmed off this project, sort of people sort of 50, 60 that didn't really know what people wanted. So I learned to work alongside people a lot more senior to me and older to me as well. So senior both in seniority hierarchy, but also in age. I learned how to manage events, which I'd been doing a little bit since university. And I learned how bitchy big French PR agencies can be. I was 24, and I was the employer, so to speak. I was paying the bill of the agency. And yet when I rang them to just ask them a nice question, they're like, yes, Becky. Yes, hi. Can I just ask you, what do you want? It's like, even at the time, I knew it was really rude, but they were horrible to me because they knew I was worth nothing in their hierarchy. You know, they knew that I wasn't anything that was going to ever come in the way of their careers. So there were my lessons. But this was a short-term contract. If you work in an embassy, you're either a diplomat or you're a locally engaged employee with no career aspirations. So I left at the end of my short-term contract, and I then spent 4 months looking for my first real job in France, because these jobs I think were sort of byproducts of luck. So I spent 4 months looking for my job. I wanted to work in events. I wanted to work in a cool PR agency. I didn't want to work for some horrible little exhibition company. I knew I wanted to be in there in the middle of it. And so I rejected a couple of offers for things that I didn't really want to be in. And in the meantime, I waitressed in Paris, and I'd saved that money, you know, in my previous jobs, and I got my break. I worked for this company called Play On, and they took me on as a B2B sort of account manager for B2B events. So I was organizing press launches. I was on to like client launches for companies like LG, Symantec, HP, Olympus. You know, there were some really sexy ones like launching telephones, and there were some very unsexy ones launching washing machines. You don't get to choose. And it would be clients saying, right, we want to sell, we want to sort of launch our washing machine to all our key clients in the white goods industry. Can you organize this? And it would be a one-off event, or it would be a roadshow, and you'd set it up. I learned how to manage upwards. My boss was lovely, really, really genuinely kind person, but was dreadful at confrontation and was walked all over by all our clients. And I had to artfully suggest that we set up a client agency contract that set out terms and conditions for briefing, for responses to briefs, and for for evaluating the quality of our proposals. Setting expectations. In my first 6 months, I didn't have any objectives set. And when I was told I wasn't meeting any objectives, I was slightly surprised because I didn't have any objectives. So I took my experience from the British Embassy and said, well, this is what I think an evaluation should look like. Maybe we could put this in place. You could tell me what you think I should be aiming for. And then in 3 months or 6 months or a year's time, we can evaluate whether I've achieved those goals, as opposed to you subjectively saying, I don't think you're doing a very good job. And I had to do that. I was 25 now, and I realized that we had a problem. I was being evaluated without any script. I was being told I wasn't up to the job, but at the same time, I hadn't been told what the job was, and I hadn't been told what was expected of me. I learned the difficulty and the complexity of agency-client relationships. I learned the bad side of it. I watched my boss be walked all over by LG. This is a Korean company, South Korean company. Now, the setup of LG at the time was that they had a marketing department in Korea, which was mirrored by a Korean marketing team in France, which was mirrored by a French marketing team who reported into the Korean marketing team who reported into Korea. So every single conversation that we had was validated 3 times over. So you can imagine the complexity of that. And I also learned the French working mindset. To give you a little bit of context, I worked for Plain for 3 years. It's an agency of 50 people, part of an international network. When I joined, there were 5 or 6 senior managers. And in the final year, all senior management were fired. And there was no management. And they made 2 middle managers, 2 women, take the lead of the agency and manage the agency. And so it was all hands on deck. The agency was either going to sink and we're all going to lose our jobs, or it was going to swim. And so we said, well, let's look at what's called organic growth. Let's look at which of our clients have the possibility to give us more money if we can do more work for them. And I volunteered and said, I can do that. I can ask questions. I'll have a go. And so we had some big clients like HP. Oracle was one of our clients. And so I sat down and said, everyone who works on Oracle, we'll sit down in a meeting and we'll talk about opportunities. We'll identify opportunities. And my colleagues who were the same age as me said, I couldn't possibly say. I'm not qualified. I'm not qualified to talk about market opportunities or market growth or tech opportunities. And with my English mindset, I was like, well, you don't have to be qualified. We just want your opinion. What do you think? And the French mindset was, I'm not trained to do this. I don't feel comfortable doing this. And it was one a very, very stark moment. And I'll come back to this because it's not as simple as saying they don't want to. It's part of a whole cultural mindset that's very, very different from a British mindset, which will again be different from an American mindset. So in the background, I've been writing an email to Red Bull every 6 months saying, how's about it? Red Bull hadn't launched in France yet. It was 2008. And actually for the last 2 years, it had 3 or 4 false starts where they thought they would get the authorizations to sell the product in the country, and they didn't. So I'd been in closer and closer contact with the team that were responsible for launching in France. And all of a sudden they launched. 2008, they got the approval from the European, actually it was the European Health Agency, and they launched the business, and I applied and I got my job. And there I stayed with Red Bull for 10 years. And I've had 3 different jobs with Red Bull. My first job was as regional marketing manager for the Parisian region. So it's Paris, but it's also the surrounding counties. It's like, I don't know, maybe New York State, for example, responsible for New York State. So it's quite big geographically, but actually most of the activity happens within, as you'd say, New York, or for Paris, within Paris. And but the particularity of this was that this was a business launching in a country. It was a brand launching in a country, and it was a category opening in the country. The energy drink category didn't exist in France before Red Bull arrived in France. So the challenges were multiple, and I was mostly employed for my event organization skills and the fact that I had good agency contacts in Paris. And yet this was a marketing role, but my core skills were, I'd say, a broad understanding of marketing, but actually core competencies, core skills in organizing events and understanding the landscape and the agency landscape in Paris. I had to recruit a team of 50 students in 3 months. I had to set my regional marketing strategy, and I had to set my regional marketing budget. We were given I don't know how much, but tell me how much you need. There was no network. Red Bull, as you know, is big in action sports. I'm not a massive action sport, I love action sports, but I don't have any network in action sports, especially not in Paris. I had to go and meet all the gum chewing skaters in Paris, all the hip hoppers, all the BMXers. I was on the BMX tracks. I was going to hip hop events. I was going to skateboard shops and saying, I love skateboarding. No, I wasn't saying that. But I was being very honest about the fact that I'm not a skateboarder, but I work for a business that can potentially help you. How can we help you? What do you need? What do you want? What would progress your sport? So it was building that network. It was also organizing and executing some what we call title events, so Red Bull events, Red Bull Many, it's a skating event, and a couple of others. And it was also building a team of students, part-time students, albeit, but building a team of students. We made a lot of humongous errors in the way we recruited, because we had to recruit 50 students times 6 regions, so 300 students in 3 months. And the pressure was to recruit. So we recruited, and then we realized we'd recruited some bad profiles. And I spent the next 2 years trying to get rid of those profiles. People who lied, people who were horrible, people really made my life a nightmare. And those are some of the things I learned. So getting into this job, what did I learn? Persistency pays off. I wanted to get into Red Bull. I knew why I wanted to get into Red Bull, and I wrote to them every 6 months for 6 years, and they were very patient with me. It was slightly different at the time, but they knew my name, and they called me when there was a job available, and they said, if you want to apply, it's now. Then I had to prove myself against everybody else. I learned how to get shit done. There wasn't really a roadmap when I got into that regional marketing job. No roadmap. It was like, you need to get involved in the region, and you need to tell us what we need to do. Concept creation. I'll come on to that. Second job in Red Bull after 2 years was I moved into the national sports team. So whereas my previous role was regional and general, so culture, students, and sports, my second job was national, so vertical, but sports, only sports. So for 6 years, I worked in the sports team, and I built their sports events strategy. So not only do we have to create concepts, so I did a lot of concept creation. One, for example, would be Red Bull Fontainebleau. So Fontainebleau is a city outside Paris, which is famous for its block climbing. Block climbing. And so we created an event which was a team concept for an individual sport. And the way we did this was we went and talked to people in that sport, and we said, what is it you love? What is it you do? How can we challenge this sport? And we worked with them. I learned about the sales marketing fight. This is a big one. Marketing team say, this is a great thing to do. And the sales team say, like, unless it's going to bring me sales, I don't want to. Red Bull arriving in France. Red Bull is very, very, very protective of its brand image, its logo, the way you use it, how you talk about the brand. It's very prescriptive for a good reason. And the sales team were like, hey, look at this. We've got this cool bar in Orleans, going to print flyers with girls in bikinis and Red Bull bikinis. What do you think? And we're like, well, we can't do it. But guys, it's going to bring us loads of sales, and my key account is really happy about it, and it's awesome. He's like, yeah, but it's going to ruin our brand. And the sales guys didn't get it. And there were a lot of what I would call like field skirmishes. Your sales rep going, I don't care. My boss says it's all right, so I'm going to do it. And you're not my boss, so I can do it. And it's really hard, and there is no right answer to this, but it's a skill you have to learn, is to talk the language of the people who you want to convince. So the sales team were all really happy because this particular flyers night with the girl in the bikini with the Red Bull bikini on is going to sell loads of drinks that night for their client. But you have to try and show to them that by doing that, you're chipping away at this iconic brand that's been spent 30 years building, and you're going to ruin bit by bit the reason why people come to that. They come to it because it's premium. They come to it because it's cool, because it's got these associations that have spent years building up. And you stick it on a girl with bikinis and a wet t-shirt contest, and you can quite quickly ruin that. I won't say I won all the fights. It's a hard fight to have, but it's definitely a fight that's real, and it's every day in every business. So Red Bull's no different. My final job, as I sort of got to 2016 in France, and I was married, I had 2 kids, and I wanted to come back to UK. So I said, hey, I want to go back to UK, and I had a look, and I kept my eyes out for jobs open in the UK. And there was one that came up as head of consumer marketing. And so I applied and I got it. And it was managing a team of all the regional marketers. So all that first job I did was regional marketing manager, 6 of those in France, there are 3 in the UK. So I went back in as the manager of this role. So it's managing a team of 17, 5 direct reports and 12 indirect reports, plus 130 part-time students. And the thing I learned in 2 years as managing a team is bloody hard. It's really hard. People are on different trajectories. They've got different expectations from their job. Their lifestyles are different. You're doing your best every single day, genuinely. I mean, if you're a good manager, you're doing your best every single day, but every single day you'll come up short. And it's a really, really hard lesson to learn as a manager, that you won't ever quite nail it. And you've got to be happy with that. And I don't think I was ever quite happy with it. But I inherited a team that had no manager for 6 months, didn't really know what they were doing, didn't really know why they were doing it. And I spent 2 years with them reviewing what they did, why they did it, how it fed into the wider business, and how that fed into the business aim and goals. And we went right back down to how we called it our path to purpose. Red Bull has a very sort of clear call to action. Red Bull gives you wings. So how are we giving wings in our day-to-day jobs to our consumers, and how did that ladder up to the higher purpose? So we did a lot of work on that. So what I want to do is just show you a couple of the highlights from mostly actually from this role in the middle here, National Sports Event Strategy and Execution. So one of the projects I managed was Red Bull cliff diving. A couple of you might have heard of it, maybe not, maybe yes. I think the one in the States was in Chicago, and another one was in Texas. This one in France, it was on the world tour, it had the biggest number of spectators. So depending on who you talk to, the organizers or the police, anywhere between 60 and 80,000 people. Free events, and so you can see that it's packed around the port, and if anyone was just to push their neighbor, everyone would just topple into that little into the port there. It was a huge organization, not just in terms of mechanics on site organizing with all the police forces and the ambulance, but it was also a very big technical operation. So you can see here, this is what it looks like on the day. This is what the media sees. It's all really cool and really sexy. It's 9 months work across on-trade sales, off-premise sales, on-premise sales, across social media, across brand, across above-the-line campaigns, across below-the-line campaigns, content creation, the comms team, in terms of photos, in terms of videos. It was a massive, massive project. And my role was not to do all of that, but to coordinate it all horizontally and then vertically to actually execute this event, put this event on with all the suppliers to do that. This is what it looked like. This is at 11 o'clock at night in the old port in La Rochelle. You can only do it once everyone's gone home, and you get this massive crane in. And you can see on the left here is the Tour Saint-Nicolas, which is an 11th century tower. And on the right, you see this massive platform, and you have to lift it into place. There's a lot of grind that goes into these types of events. Second project, same project, but in a totally different place in Corsica. We had about 100 spectators instead of 80,000, totally different objectives. And you can see this little platform here. It's 27 meters high off a cliff, and it hangs off, again, an 11th century fort. We had to get permissions from the ports. We had to get permissions from the Maritime Association, from the National, what's it called? National Buildings Association, because the forts are very, very old. And we also, you see this down here, this rock. This is our HQ. We had to boat everything in, all our tech. So this looks all lovely. It was beautiful. This was my reality, arriving on site and realizing that we had a whole bunch of concrete blocks we had to move, and there was no one else to be with it apart from myself and 2 other guys. I spent 10 days on site, and it was a lot of sweat and a lot of tears, a lot of late nights and readjusting and reviewing plans and then realigning with the teams the next morning. It took us, we had to, you can see here, there's these yellow buoys. Can you see those? The maritime port said we had to allocate a channel for the big ferries coming in so that they would know not to crush our spectators. So I said, okay, how do I do that? I said, talk to the director of the port. I said, okay. And I talked to him and he goes, well, you just draw a map and just pinpoint where you think the buoys should be. Okay, I'll do that. And I said, and who puts the buoys in the water? And he said, well, you do. I'll give you a boat and you can put the buoys in the water. I said, okay, how deep's the water? I'm not quite sure, maybe 2 meters. So we did our maths, number of buoys times number of meters times length of rope. We went and bought the stuff, went out in the boats, and I briefed my team and I said, here you go, fellas. And these are my colleagues. Like, they do the same projects and we work on each other's projects. I gave them a boat, I gave them a skipper, and I gave them some rope, and I gave them some buoys. And I said, it should take you half an hour according to the port authorities. It took us 3 days, 3 days to do it. 3 days of pain. But again, you see these projects, you plan one thing and another thing happens. The final one I'm going to show you, this is Red Bull Skylines. So it was one of the biggest projects. And the reason why I'm talking about this project is we worked with a guy called Nate Wessel. He's an American who's a big dude in BMX. And he designed this skate park, this BMX park. And it was a one of a kind, it was massive, never designed before. And we did it in the Grand Palais, which is the center of Paris. It's beautiful, turn of the century exhibition center. And my colleague was managing the project, and my role was just to come in for the last month and manage the builders who were building the project. And it was Nate and his team of 5 Americans, and added to that, we added in 12 Germans and we had 4 Frenchmen. And I've never managed a more explosive bunch. Mixing Germans with Frenchmen with Americans is a pretty tricky call. So that's what it looked like. This was my reality. This was in the warehouse, and this is what the guys were doing. And I was managing requests from Nate to go and buy 6,000 nails, to get him forklift trucks with extra long forks and not the short forks. We obviously got the wrong ones. There's a whole bunch of, I've got lots and lots of stories about Nate. But as you can see, the projects look really sexy on the front end, and actually the back end was really quite gritty and quite tiresome and quite detailed. So that brings me to an end of sort of career highlights. And what I want to talk to you about just briefly is France versus UK. So it's very different. And again, you know, UK to America will be different again. I've got lots of American friends. I've got a minimum appreciation of that. France is very hierarchical. Your age really matters, because your age somehow in France denotes stature, denotes I've been there and I've done that. So there's a definite sense that we respect age. Formal learning matters. When I applied for jobs in France, I had a French and film degree and some ad hoc experiences in marketing, and they were like, yeah, I love, and they call it this American approach of favoring experience and sort of approach and sort of transferable skills. I love that. And I said, okay, how about employing me? Yeah, I need someone trained in marketing though. And it took me a long time to crack that nut. And the way I cracked it was, as I said, you know, very beginning, I did events, and I got into events, and I did the events for British Embassy, and that got me to the agency where I did events, but it was comms events, and that got me to Red Bull where I was doing events, but it was marketing, and then I moved into the marketing side. So that's how I wended my way in France. You'll do it differently in different businesses in different countries. France is overtly combative. I had the interesting situation where I worked in Red Bull in France and I worked for Red Bull in the UK. So I can compare 2 companies from 2 different countries. In France, I had stand-up fights with my boss in the corridor where we'd scream at each other, and he'd walk out the door and I'd walk out the door, and then we'd come back and have another fight. In marketing meetings, you know, people would scream at each other and tell each other that their ideas were shit, and they didn't like what they were saying. I came over to the UK and I sort of transposed the same meeting, and everyone would go, God, yeah, I really like your input. Thank you very much, Becky, for talking. And they would walk out and go, well, that was a pile of shit, wasn't it? So, you know, you get where you come for. France is, they'll shit on you in the middle of a meeting, but they'll say what they think right there and then. They're very critical. They'll want to go to the end of your logic and your reason, and they'll really push you to defend your ideas and defend your structure. The UK, it's very consensual. They're looking for a consensus. They'll try and see the good, and they'll try and bring it round to a consensus. There isn't a right, there isn't a wrong, but it's to being aware of both. Don't be offended when people are shooting you down in France, and equally don't think that it's all okay just because everyone says yes around a table in the UK. And France form is very important. The way you do things, the way you talk to people. There are different ways to address people. Vous, tu. One's very formal, one's very colloquial. It's very important. I can get away with it because I'm English, and I can say, oh, I just forgot, and I don't master the language, which I do, but it is very important. So what I thought I'd finish up on, just where I am now. So, you know, obviously I left Red Bull, and you're probably wondering, well, why did you leave Red Bull? Look quite cool. I was actually made redundant from Red Bull. Sorry, I'm just about to be interrupted. Can you guys jump? Va chercher papa.
Non, je vais pas faire ça.
Je suis au téléphone. Va chercher papa.
Non.
Excuse me. It's also life as a parent. I was made redundant from Red Bull. There was a restructure. The business, I know that the business was told to cut heads and cut headcounts, and the business in the UK looked at the whole of the entire marketing department of 95 and said, this is probably where I can do it. And I was that headcount. I know I left on good terms with everybody, and I'm not ashamed of it, but it's quite a hard thing to actually have to go through when you work for a business for 10 years. And I loved it, and I know I did a great job. I know from my reviews from the people I worked with, I'm not worried about that, but it's a pretty tough learning curve to say I'm not indispensable. So I found myself on the job market in 2018, aged 38, and I hadn't really thought about where I was going with my career. And I realized I had lots of holes, lots of gaps. And this is where I went back and said, actually, some of the reasons why I was struggling to argue and put across my case in some of these situations, because I didn't have the formal marketing training. I didn't have that knowledge. I didn't have the science behind my feelings and my experience I've learned on the job. So I went back and I filled in those gaps. And I worked for a couple of startups, Ellipse and Banked. There were fintech startups. I worked for Cosmic, which is it's a startup, but it's actually, I wouldn't call it a startup. It's a small business starting up. It's a workspace in the UK and London. And I worked for Speedo. Very different role. Cosmic, they need help with their marketing because they need to attract clients. Speedo needed help with their brand structure. So things I've learned is that learning never stops. Might sound very tiring to you guys as you're finishing your learning degrees, but don't leave it alone. Come back to it. Keep chipping away every now and again when you feel either the need or the gaps. I've realized I don't like working with startups. They want strategy. They tell you want strategy, but actually what they want is execution. It's really messy, and if you don't know exactly what you're doing and how to do it, it's really hard, morally and emotionally. I've learned that good project management skills are gold. So many people don't know how to do it. So lots of businesses have great ideas, but they struggle in the execution. And I found a job for 9 months with the Royal Opera House in London, essentially being a project manager for them across marketing, because nobody could do it. Nobody could coordinate the departments to look at in the same direction at the same time. And I've understood the power of understanding the maths. As an independent marketer, when businesses come to you and say, yeah, I need marketing, and you say, well, what do your financials look like? And they can't answer that question. And they can't answer how much they need to break even, then you know there's warning bells. And you can't do your job properly until those maths are in place, that maths is in place. So what would if I could go back and advise people graduating right now? 53 minutes, sorry, I've realized I've gone on quite long. My first thing is that technical or hard skills are only half the battle. If you can't get your colleagues to work with you, it doesn't matter how much you know. Sometimes you'll have to manage up, sometimes you'll have to manage across, sometimes you'll have to manage down. But if you can't do that, Doesn't matter how great you are, it won't work. Second thing I've learned is relationships matter. I won a contract with Speedo because I kept in touch with the guy who I was student brand manager with 20 years ago. And just so happened that the time he needed something and we were in touch and I was available, I was there. And I've got lots of other stories like that, but I think that's the most brutal. Good communication skills are gold. I've so many times people talk about, yeah, I'll get back to you, but they don't say when, they don't say how, they don't say where, they don't say what they're going to give. And people get really cross, and then there's this sort of horrible sort of misunderstandings that go on, and they're just unnecessary. Be clear in what you're saying, what you're asking from people, and what you're going to give them. There's no such thing as a career path. There used to be this career ladder. You could start somewhere and just go up the rungs and end up at the top as top dog, and that was great. There's no such thing. There's a career wall, climbing wall, if you like. I've seen colleagues who have to move across a step and down a couple of steps to then move up 3 steps. It's really important. Take your pride out of it, because it sounds quite twee, but the journey is actually more important. And maybe you'll go further. You don't know what you don't know, so keep learning. There's a whole bunch of things you don't know that you don't know. And so keep an open mind to that. Your priorities will change, and embrace it. You can spend a lot of energy and a lot of time thinking, chasing the dream of becoming X or Y, when actually the reasons why you're not getting there is because your priorities have changed and you're blocking yourself because you've just changed aspirations, you've changed directions, you've got married, you haven't got married, you've had kids, you haven't had kids. All these things will play into your career. Find your own voice. Don't borrow someone else's. A lot of times I sort of haven't known what to do in a situation. I've asked for advice, and I've been given advice that suits the person who's giving the advice, but doesn't suit me and my style. And it's backfired. Being abrasive when I'm not abrasive, being meek when I'm not meek. It doesn't matter. Find your style, and don't be afraid of using your style. You've got to be comfortable with who you are and how you deal with things. And the final thing is, I used to say this when I was recruiting at Red Bull, we've got the luxury of not having to recruit dicks, so let's not do it. But don't be a dick yourself. You just don't need to. You just don't need to. That's it.
Thank you. All right. Fantastic. Now, I've got a question for you, Becky.
Yes.
Because at one time I believed that the greatest goal in my life was to be the VP of sales and marketing.
Yes. And don't we all?
And so I found the job, and it was the worst decision I ever made. And so the first question I ask is, was Red Bull worth it?
Yes, definitely. The reason why it was worth it wasn't because of the job titles or anything. It's because all the stuff I've done. I've met some of my best friends. I've sat on top of mountains, chatting with people who I've never chat to otherwise, never met otherwise. I've ate food I would never eaten otherwise. I mean, I made it my thing. Every site location check, I wanted to have the regional food. I wanted to go to the restaurant. I wanted to do this. I've met people to put on these events. You can't do it as a business. You can't just, whether you're Red Bull, whether you're Speedo, whether you're Microsoft, you can't organize these events without the people who know their stuff. So when you're organizing a mountain event, you go to like the mountain goats. You go to the guys who live in the mountains all year, and you say, how do we do this? So spending time with them is really, really good fun, because they show you things and they take you places that you would never have been to before.
It sure looked fun, I'll say that. Now, any recommendations on how you picked up product management skills? Were there any books or any classes?
No, so two things. One was a very sort of a direct product. So working with Red Bull, it's a product. There is only one thing you sell. It's a can. Now there are a few different variations of that can, but Red Bull is very, very clear, and it's what it does really well. It's clear about what it's doing, and it's all about can sales. So forget about building brand love and all the rest of it. Yes, it tracks it, it looks at it, and it follows it. But if you're not selling cans, then it's not working, and it doesn't matter. And it was really crystal clear on that, to the point where every month there would be sales updates. What are the on-premise channels doing? What are the off-premise channels doing? How are sales tracking versus predictions, and you could then, and versus previous year versus the last 10 years, you could see your sales targets every year. Now, whilst I wasn't targeted with sales, I could see how sales were tracking. Now, it's a slightly different aspect of product management, because then you understood sort of what type of products you were launching and how you're positioning the product in the market. It's a very sort of factual product. And then there's a very different type of product, which is not now the current tech product. And I've worked with three businesses, but two businesses. So Ellipse and Banked. They were tech products. So it's an immaterial product. It's an app. It's an API that you're selling. And I worked directly with the product managers who were developing the product, and understanding how developing that product links back to marketing.
Would you say Red Bull's more of a sales-driven company?
No, I wouldn't say it's more of a sales-driven company, but it really understands that if it's not making sales, it's not doing the job you need it to do. So there's a very clear focus every month on, yes, what are our top of mind awareness? What are our brand scores doing? But also, what are our sales doing? And how do those track? How do those match?
All right, I want to open up the floor here to anyone that has any questions. As Becky said, no questions are off limits. So as she's gone through her experience, ask away.
Yeah.
You could take yourself off mute and just blurt it out, or else throw it in the chat box and I'll shout it out for you.
Just have a go. I've worked, especially in France, most of the team I worked in an all-male team, all very masculine male. I've been pregnant twice at work. I've been refused a job because I might get pregnant. So ask away.
But a lot of what you said when working with French marketers reminds her of the Netflix show Emily in Paris. Have you watched it?
Yeah, I watched it with my French husband. We loved it and hated it in equal measures. All my French friends hated it because it's not like France, and all my English friends loved it because I thought it was totally like France.
Oh, but what was it? Was it like France? True or false?
I mean, it's it's kind of like France, but just exaggerated. There are a lot of what do you call them? Silver foxes in France. I think they're God's gift to women.
Okay. Any other questions? Anybody? Come on.
I have a question. So, kind of going off of what you said about how you have worked with an all-male team. I'm in a very similar position. It's just me and one other woman. And especially being so young and still in college, like I haven't, officially graduated yet. What would you recommend doing to sort of establish myself, not like just as a woman, like surrounded by a lot of masculine males who don't always listen all the time, but also as someone who's maybe less experienced, but has an education, whereas the males do not. And how do you kind of balance that and do it gracefully, but also effectively?
I won't have necessarily the answer. I give you potentially how I would do it. I think the biggest thing in any business when you're coming in, and whether you're coming in at a junior level or a senior level, is you've got to listen a lot. But not just listen, show you're listening. And it's a subtle difference. Ask questions. Ask questions. How does this work? And don't be afraid to not know the answers. I mean, a lot of people don't ask questions because they don't want to seem like they don't know the answer. I mean, essentially, you're the fool at the end if you don't know the answer and you're not asking the question, because at some point you might get asked to do it and everyone's just assumed that you know. So, use that. I'm new. I'm here. I'm new to the business, and I'm clearly just starting my career. Ask a lot of questions. Asking questions will give you a lot of answers that other people aren't getting. And in asking those questions, you can't go wrong, and people will potentially pick up that you're asking those questions and the other people aren't asking those questions. And I would say the other thing is, don't be frightened to have a point of view. Not all point of views are equal, especially when you're faced with somebody with 20 years experience, but essentially sometimes the best ideas come from people who are looking at things totally fresh. And just be totally honest about where you're coming from and what you're seeing and how you're hearing things, and play it back to people, because I very often find myself in three-way conversations where I'd say something to one person and I wanted to be sure that I knew it was going to go back around and come back at me. So I'd tell the other person in that triangle that I'd told the other person the thing I told them, so that nobody could go, well, you said to so-and-so that. And it was a way of me covering my bases that I was never had my legs cut from under me. I did that
Thank
quite a lot.
you.
It's fine.
Okay, here's a question. What would your advice be for a young professional trying to work their way up? As well as what should you look for in a company to know it's the right place to work or it could be the right fit for you? How do you measure fit?
Gosh, that's really hard. And I'm still working that out. I'm still working that out. It's very difficult to know unless you're a very, very good person, very, very good reader of people. Because job adverts, for a start, most of them are full of bullshit.
Yep.
You know, they're full of buzzwords, and they're full of sort of like, we love an attitude, but they actually don't like it when you have an attitude. Or so I'm not quite sure what to say. Instead of when you're interviewing with somebody, remember that you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And I've been in a couple of wrong jobs before, and I've worked that out quite quickly. I would rather work with a mediocre job and a great people than a great job and mediocre people every single time. And I learned that quite young, but it keeps coming back at me that this is a true thing. Every single time. If you think you might like these people, there's a good chance you can work with them.
Thank you.
Now, here's a question. When you were in France and you and your boss were yelling at each other, how did you deal with that? Did it discourage you from communicating or
So I can't quite remember why we were yelling at each other at this particular time, but I mean, for example, when you're working on an event and you've been working, so that Skylines event you saw, it was there was a month build up to the event where I was working weekends and nights and stuff, and taking the builders team out for a drink and for a pizza because they were fed up with the French food and so on. And then you get to the week of the event, 10 days of the event, and it's full on, and we've got a load in that starts at midnight on Sunday night, and you've worked from midnight Sunday night until the following evening, and you're finally falling over and you think, I might go home for some sleep. But during that week, you realize that we've wildly underestimated the time it's going to take to do anything, and we're all very tired, and at 3 a.m. we're still there painting modules and all sorts. It was horrible, horrible. And your boss pushes you just that one bit further, and you start crying. And then you walk away, and he's like, I need to cry. And he's like, thank you, because I was really tired and I really needed to be made to cry. And he wasn't mean. He was just, he was just being a bit of a dick. But the way I dealt with it every single time was being really, really honest about how I felt and how the behavior made me feel. So the words, how those words made me feel. So that's not saying you're mean to me. That's saying you using those words made me feel like this. And it's rational. You can't do it in the moment. You've got to sort of take a minute or a day or a week. But you've got to be able to come back and face it head on and rationalize and saying, you saying this about me made me feel as though I wasn't X or I was Y. Now that person might say, gosh, I didn't realize that. Or they might say, well, that's your problem. But then at least you know where you stand with that person. And quite often, even though you don't resolve the situation, you feel better for having stood up for yourself. And it's not about saying you're mean or you're critical and I don't like your criticism. It's about saying you using that word made me feel like this. And maybe they'll revise the words they use next time. I think we were actually having a fight about the fact my colleague was having quite poor performance reviews and I was having good performance reviews, and yet I was still the junior. So that's why we were having a fight. My colleague was a guy as well.
Any other questions? Here's a chance. She's going to answer any question.
There was one at the top. Sorry, I'm being very, very frank. There's one at the top. What's your biggest piece of advice, specifically when planning and managing these big events? I love event planning. Would really love to hear. The biggest piece of advice. You've got to include everybody who's involved. There are a lot of stakeholders in organizing an event, and quite often you discover them as you go along. So when I say stakeholders, is people have a piece of the pie. They've got a reason for wanting something to happen or not happen. So take going to having cliff diving in Corsica. The reason why it happened in Corsica was because some person stuck a spoke in the wheel when it was supposed to happen in near Marseille, in Cassis near Marseille. So we went with our project. We talked to the mayor. The mayor was like, yes, bring it on, have it. I want this event. We talked to the local diving association. They were like, yes, bring it on, we'll have it. And we had lined up our big meeting, and we had everybody around a table, 25 people around the table. I present the project, and I know that the mayor's on board, so I'm thinking this is a done deal because it's in her town. And then the Parks Board speak up and they say, thank you very much, Becky. What's your plan B? And I knew we'd lost it, because the zone that we were holding, we wanted to hold the event in, was owned by the Parks Board, and the Parks Board had recently passed a law to prevent mass events, and we hadn't done our homework sufficiently. So we hadn't worked out who all the stakeholders were, gone to them individually, talked to them about it, said, what do you think? How would you like to hold the event? There's a lot of hand holding, and there's a lot of what I call soft politics involved in event organization.
Question asked, what was your favorite campaign you've worked on or created?
I've got two. So one of them was the Red Bull cliff diving in La Rochelle, but the particular year was 2013. And the reason why I loved it, because it all went perfectly. I'd done it in 2011 in La Rochelle, and it was painful. It was my first project. I was totally submerged by everything. And I ran around sort of chasing my tail for the whole project. Felt like I was sinking the whole time. 2012 went to Corsica, and I thought, I've got this nailed, done this before. And totally different kettle of fish. Working in Corsica is like working in the Wild West, nothing standard. And 2013, third year running, and I was working with a colleague who I was training on the job, and everything went really well. It was smooth, everyone got along, and because we'd really worked out how we were going to communicate between each other. So I was project managing, but we'd split the project in two, and he was managing half the projects and I was managing the second half of the projects, and he was supposed to report into me. He was one of those guys who's lovely, about 10 years younger than me, 8 years younger than me, but desperate to prove himself. And so at every possible opportunity was like basically nipping at my heels. And I said to him, like, right from the start, I don't want to spend my time second guessing you. I want to work with you. I want to give you all the stuff that you want to have, and I won't question you. I'll trust you to do it. But I don't want you second guessing me in front of everybody else, because it just won't work as a team. And I won't do the same to you. I won't cut you down in front of other people. I will defer to you and refer to you on your topics, but I want, us to concern. We had that conversation at the beginning, and it worked really well, and everyone noticed it worked really well. It was a nice project to work on.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we've gone on. It's 4 o'clock. Becky, I appreciate this. Everyone, we're going to take the usual picture now. We stole this idea from Colin. So everybody get your thumbs up. I want to see the thumbs up like this. So I get this picture of the class. Come on, get your thumbs up. That's it. Beautiful. Nice. All right. Becky, thank you so much. Can the students?
My son's got his thumbs up in the background.
I saw your son in there.
Is it Americans?
Hey, what's happening, brother? Welcome.
Hi.
We're all the way over the ocean in Westchester, PA, or all around. Good to see the little one. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Becky.
Thank you, everyone. And if it's an open invitation. If anyone wants to ask me any questions on LinkedIn, then you're welcome to.
Okay, we can connect with you through LinkedIn. I will share that information. Fantastic. All right. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful night. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.